Welcome to another edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus. In this video, it's going to be a little bit different than my normal videos. I will be reviewing Nikon's 35 to 70 2.8 autofocus lens. This is the non-D version. This is the version that was introduced in 1987. And then the D version came out in 1992. But this isn't just a review of the lens, it's also a review of how the lens and the Nikon D810 perform together, shooting a 5K race, and also some shots around Merchantville, New Jersey during Halloween season. And I shot at all focal lengths from 35 to 70 and everything in between, and at various apertures. So we're going to get to look at a lot of pictures, and also it's several different ISOs with the D810. So this lens is a push-pull zoom. It is 2.8 throughout the range, and it stops down to f/22. So let's look at some specifications on this lens. It has 15 elements in 12 groups. It has a 7-blade aperture. It will focus as close as 2 feet or 0.6 meters normally, but then it has a macro setting at the 35 millimeter zoom position. I'll explain in a minute how that works. And that will get you down to 1 foot or 0.28 meters from the focal plane. It takes 62 millimeter filters. It weighs 23.4 ounces or 665 grams. And it also takes the HB1 bayonet lens shade. Now this lens is longer at the 35 millimeter setting, as you can see here, and it gets more compact when you zoom to 70 millimeters. Also, as you focus, the filter ring turns, so it's not the most convenient lens to use with polarizers. Okay, so I said I was going to explain how the macro mode works. First, you zoom to 35 millimeters, and you press this button that you can see here, and then you turn the zoom ring to the left, and that puts you in to macro mode, as you see here. When you're in macro mode, and it's only at the setting of 35 millimeter, you have to manually focus using the front focus ring there. Okay, autofocus is disengaged. One other thing with this lens, if you are using it on a Nikon autofocus camera, you must lock your aperture down to f/22, and then you rotate this little button here so that the white mark lines up with the orange mark so that it stays at f/22. If you don't do that, you're going to get an error message, the FEE error message on the camera. Now, the same day I tested this lens, I also tested the Pentax Super Takumar 55 millimeter 2.0, and I did a review of that in my last video. So look that up. All these pictures were shot in Merchantville, some at the 5K run. There was also a 1K run, as well as some pictures around Merchantville. Merchantville is big on Halloween, so people go all out decorating, and you're going to see a lot of pictures of some of those decorations. Now, this was called the Zombie Run, and some of the runners were in costume. And this house, which was across the street from the start of the race, I think they're a little early on Christmas. Everybody else is decorated for Halloween. So this shot here was shot at 70 millimeter. A lot was shot at 70. I was set for continuous autofocus. The aperture was f/11, and the camera performed really well. It's a 10-year-old camera. The lens is older than that. The lens is from 1987, and it is a screw drive lens, so it requires a camera with a built-in focus motor that the D810 has. This lens would not autofocus on Nikon mirrorless cameras. And it kept focus really well. This shot here, this gentleman was at 70 millimeters. Most of these running shots were shot at 70. and it was at f8. This is one of the spectators at 5.6. And I was shooting at 5 frames a second at the top speed of the D810. And this is the start of the race at 6.3 at 70 millimeters. And I was using shutter priority. My shutter speed varied a little bit, 1,000th, 1/1600th of a second, and using matrix metering. And these shots here were at between 52 and 44 millimeters. It varied as they got closer to me. It wasn't a lot of runners. I'm going to say, I'm not sure, maybe 75 runners. But the camera really kept up continuous autofocus with group area autofocus. Now, it doesn't focus as well as my Z8 with a modern lens, but it did a pretty darn good job. And I recently did a video, is the D810 still relevant in 2024? And it is. I mean, even for action photography, this camera is still very usable. And I think that's amazing for a 10-year-old camera. Has an excellent autofocus system. Now, these ladies here were spectators. This was at 6.3 at 70 millimeters. And then they started the 1K portion of the race, which they ran in the opposite direction. A lot of kids with this, and shot a few shots of them. This was at 52 millimeters. And then here's a little sequence just to show you how the camera could keep up. This was at the maximum speed, which is 5 frames a second. This was a little less than a 1-second burst. There's 4 frames here of this dad with his kids. This was at 58 millimeters at f8, and it maintained focus. Now, these kids, these little kids and their dad, were not running as fast as a lot of the other runners, the runners in the 5K race, but they were still moving pretty quick, and they looked very happy to be in the race. So I then moved on a little bit, and I shot this tree at f4 at 52 millimeters. I was looking for chromatic aberration. I see none. Okay, so now I kind of moved on and was looking for some of the decorations. This house was shot at 35 millimeters at f8, and it is sharp edge to edge. This lens is really sharp at f8. Here's a shot of the church this was at f8 at 70 millimeters, and no special reason. I just kind of liked that shot through the trees. So now we're back to the decorations. This devil was shot at 48 millimeters at 5.6. Then a wider shot of the house, and they just go all out here. A ton of decorations. This is only a small portion of them. You'll see more. This was at 58 millimeters at f8. This nice young lady holding this severed head was at f8 at 70 millimeters. And then I shot at 2.8. And it's sharp. Not as sharp as the shot at f8, but I wanted to see the bokeh. So this next image here, we're zoomed in to the area with the trees behind her head. And I really like the bokeh on this lens at 2.8 at 70 millimeters. There's another at 2.8, and it's sharp. It's not as sharp as my 24 to 70 2.8 Z-mount zoom, but it's very sharp. It has less contrast. I think it has a nice look to it. It is a multi-coated lens. Now, this image here was shot at 55 millimeters and f16. And I've always tried not to shoot at small apertures, f16, f22, because you're supposed to lose sharpness. So I zoomed in on this image, and I would say it is a little less sharp than at f8, but it's very usable in my opinion. So if you need the depth of field, shoot at f16. I don't think you should avoid it if you really need that depth of field. Okay, so now I'm shooting up into the sun. And this was at 40 millimeters at f8, and you could see some flare. Then I jumped up to ISO of 3200. And the D810 is very good at high ISO images. I shot this at f11 at 35 millimeters. And now we're going to zoom in just to see. There is some noise, but it's very well controlled. Now here's another shot looking up into the sun at f11 at 35 millimeters. And you could see in the middle of that pink area is kind of the shape of the aperture. So, and here's another with the sun in the image at the very top. And we start to get some sun stars. This is also at f11. And I think part of the issue with this lens, it doesn't have the more modern coatings that today's lenses do, but also the lens shade isn't very effective. As you saw from the pictures earlier in this video, the lens shade is very small. So this shot here of the church was at 35 millimeters at 5.6, and it is sharp edge to edge. This was across the street from the church. And then there are, some flowers. The color is very good. I shot this same image with the 50 millimeter Takumar in my previous video. And the same thing with this. And again, looking for CA, I didn't see any. So we're going to end this video with some more pictures of the race, but I think it's a decent combination. No, it's not as good as today's modern cameras, but a 10-year-old camera and a lens that's 37 years old, it's pretty amazing. And these were all here. This little sequence here was a 1-second sequence at 5 frames a second, and they're all sharp, and the camera kept up. The lens kept up. So imagine if I put a AFS lens on this camera, the autofocus is going to be better. Of course, the focus points don't cover the entire frame, but it does a nice job. And as I answered this question before earlier this year in a video, but the Nikon D810 in 2024 is still very relevant. And if you want to save some money, not spend a fortune on mirrorless system, this camera can still do it. So if you have any questions on this video or comments, please leave them in the comments below. I always try to respond to all questions and comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I usually publish a new video every Monday morning and Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So I will talk to you next time.